as we go through the business. I think the meeting is being recorded for broadcast, I'm told, so we can all watch ourselves back if we so wish. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, Tom.
We've got apologies from Councillor Swan, Councillor Anua and Councillor Rowell. And Councillor Lux is here as a substitute.
Thank you and welcome to the substitutes. Declarations of interest.
Sorry, could you just note Councillor Collins?
Councillor Collins' apologies as well, and Councillor Lux is substituting for Councillor Carr.
Super, thank you for substituting. Any declarations of interest by anybody? No. Minutes of the last meeting on page 4 to 6, any comments on those, or can we take them as a true record? Yeah. Happy with that. Thank you. Public participation. There has been 2 questions received, one for the Mayor and one for me. They're not here to ask them, so I believe written responses will be issued and put in the minutes for the next meeting. Is that right?
Sorry.
Super. Thank you. Item 6 is budget consultation feedback. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. It's, as part of the wider budget consultation, which was approved by the EMCCA board on the 16th of December, we're asking all of the individual advisory committees, including the Transport Digital Connectivity Committee, to give their views in relation to the key points within the budget. I just thought I'd briefly cover some of those and some of the updates that we've had since that report came out on the 16th of December as well, before then hopefully taking on any questions or discussion that comes through as part of that. Just to position this, that it's EMCCA's first medium-term financial plan, which is looking at 3 to 4 years in terms of budget, together with the annual budget for next year as well. And that in terms of consultation, we started the consultation on the 16th of December after the board, and it officially finishes today. This is the very last meeting for that consultation process as well. Within the budget itself, we are looking at a capital programme for next year now. I'll talk about some of the more recent announcements that have come out that have made this significantly larger than it looked on the 16th of December, of around about £215 million in terms of capital programme, and around about £160 million of revenue for next year. So a significant chunk of about £377 million for the budget as a whole, and at least 120 or more million pounds of that is money that EMCCA have brought in that wouldn't have been available to the region otherwise. So again, some significant funding coming in there, and some significant funding because of EMCCA being around that the region wouldn't have benefited from outside of that. A significant amount of that funding as well in relation to purely transport schemes. The main ones of those, just very recently announced, as at the back end of last week, was the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. This is the funding that is only available to male combined authorities across the country. And is part of effectively a down payment for the £1.5 billion of Network North money, I think, that was announced some little time ago under the previous government, and obviously we hope under the spending review, but this will continue in the future. But we've been allocated £66 million in total for next year. 55 million of that is capital and 11 million pounds of that is revenue. So I think a good start for us, and we'll be working on schemes on those and projects and looking at how they may be deployed. It's for major transport projects, and again this committee looked, I think, in November as part of the investment committee about how this might be utilised on some of the particularly large schemes across the area. We're bringing that report back to this committee in March to look at the potential projects, and then on to our main board on the 10th of March for approval. Second major area of funding is highways maintenance. This is the funding that comes from government effectively to maintain highways, and last year included a significant amount of pothole funding. This year they've rolled the two into one, but we've got £75.7 million across the region for highways maintenance. Again, a significant uplift in terms of the baseline figure for 24-25. It's about £21 million more than we had previously. So again, positive for us as a region that we've got more funding in to be able to maintain the quality of our roads. And that will be passported out to the constituent councils who do that on EMCCA's behalf, so to the 2 counties and the 2 cities. We've also got the allocations in for our bus service improvement programme. This is the funding that comes from government to support the bus routes that are run across the region. It comes in form of both revenue and capital. In terms of capital, we have an additional £21.5 million to spend next year across the region. Again, on priorities in relation to the bus network or particularly ancillary issues linked to that, and £19.5 million of revenue. That £19.5 million of revenue, last year we know there was about 14.5 spent across the region on supporting the buses. So again, it's about £5 million extra headroom compared to where we were last year in terms of that programme. That can be used on any support for the wider bus or indeed public transport network that comes into the bus service improvement programme. Final thing to mention briefly, purely in terms of transport, is that we are still busy following on from, I know, the report that this committee would have considered its last meeting, looking at the public transport transition, effectively how we take on responsibility for concessionary fares on buses and for supported routes on buses as well from the 4 constituent councils into EMCCA, which we have to do by no later than April 26, but we're looking to hopefully achieve during the midway through next year. That work is still underway. We identified what the global figure is that is currently spent by the 4 constituent councils, net of that bus service grant I talked about, and that is a figure around about £26 million. And again, provisionally that will be going into our budget for next year, but that's still subject to final discussions and decisions from the March meeting of this committee and then the March board as well. So they're the main ones purely in relation to revenue. I will just briefly mention there are other ones, of course, that transport. There are other ones that transport has a significant impact on that you may want to think about as well as part of the transport remit. First of those being skills, of course. In terms of skills, we need to make sure that we can get people to skills provision. We need to make sure as well in terms of employability that people get to work through that. So transport's a huge role on that one. And just to mention 3 areas of the budget in there that are critical, we think, in relation to skills. The first is that we take on responsibility for the Adult Skills Fund from August next year. That's £35 million next year and £53 million the year after. And that funds a significant amount of 19 plus skills provision across the piece. And again, we'll be thinking about how we work that through strategically to ensure that we have the right accessibility for those people to be able to get into skills. Connect to Work is a new programme from government in terms of helping people with some form of health condition get into work and then maintain themselves in work as well. £13 million for us for next year to help in terms of developing those. And again, I think transport will have a significant impact on that one. And then on skills, the final one to mention is the Youth Guarantee. We're a trailblazer on that one. For next year, £5 million again from central government to help develop new schemes to help those who are aged 18 to 21 who are not in education, employment or training to get into education, employment, training. Again, transport, I think, have a role to play in relation to that. And then finally, if I may, just a couple more things to briefly mention before we then pause. And transport will have a significant impact on both of these. The first is the funding we've now got for the East Midlands investment zone. So that's now been approved for the first 5 years by government, and we've got £140 million over 5 years from government. Next year, £6 million revenue and £15 million capital to be spent effectively on 2 key sectors for us, the green sector and advanced manufacturing. And again, transport will have a significant role in relation to that as we look to deploy those funds. And the final point to raise is that, of course, as a combined authority, we have access to each year £19 million of capital and £19 million of revenue investment funding as well, so £38 million pot in that. And as you'll probably be aware, we're looking at initial projects that have been through our December board and will hopefully be approved at February and March board for taking forward. A number of those have transport connotations with them as well, and I'd like to have some in the future. So there's a wide range of issues in our budget, not just those that are purely related to transport, but also those wider ones that have a significant transport element to them as well. So if I pause there, if that's okay, Chair, and then happy to take any questions or discussion in relation to the shape of the budget itself and those any of the issues mentioned.
Thanks, Nick, for that detailed update, particularly on the new funding that's just been announced. It's good to see more money coming through. Any questions? I'll go to Melon and then Nicola.
Thank you for the report. I think when those of us were arguing 2 or 3 years back and advocating for setting up an East Midlands combined authority, one of the main arguments was that we were being short-changed in the East Midlands. And so it's really gratifying to see just 8 months into the authority being established that more money is coming in this direction. I think we need to shout that from the rooftops, really. The second thing is the role of transport in getting young people to jobs. I think it's absolutely vital. In Nottingham, only half the households have cars, so if young people, much less likely to have cars, need to get to places where there's work, it's fine in the city because of our integrated transport system. It's not so good to get to places outside of the city where there might be a concentration of employment opportunities, such as the East Midlands Airport Junction 27, 28, for young people from the city to get there. So I think it is important to link those things up. Of course, we want to get more young people into employment and education and training, but they need to be able to get there.
Thank you, Nick. I don't know if you can respond to that.
Well, I mean, just to say, I absolutely agree in terms of it's very, very pleasing to say significant additional funding, as I say, coming into the region now, given the type of EMCCA. That's a real positive, and hopefully a down payment again for us, you know, for future years as well in terms of that. I think in terms of the connectivity, in terms of getting your people to jobs, absolutely, and that was why I mentioned that wider skills piece. Rather than just looking at purely the transport options for us here, because actually I think it's about how we do that stitching up together and how we create those networks that enable us to be able to get young people into skills, opportunities and into jobs, and also people as well, you know, some more generally over 19 as well into those opportunities as well through there. So to me it's all about that wider network. I know that's something that, you know, certainly our transport colleagues and the other mayors are interested in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a great thank you for that breakdown, and like Councillor Mullen, obviously very much welcome the additional money coming into the region, but I just wondered whether at what stage can we have more of a constituent authority breakdown, how much is each receiving, and perhaps more importantly when, and that relates to both the CRSTS and also our highways maintenance budgets and so on. So obviously our residents are anxious that we are carrying on the work, so it's a question of when can we start spending, so when can we actually look forward to physically receiving the money. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, happy to answer those. In terms of highways maintenance one, we've actually got the provisional allocations of that already sorted out, because that's passported directly through to the constituent councils in the same proportion as the ones previously, which is around, it's done on a Department for Transport basis around road length, effectively. And we hope to be able to get all those finalised in terms of the indications at the board in February, and then finally in terms of getting all the detailed stuff out that will need to be in that, certainly well in advance of the 31st of March. This year, so you should be able to start spending that from the 1st of April, because that money doesn't come into play until next financial year. So we can make sure you've got all of those in play. On the CRSTS, that's a slightly different route to get to that. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be having discussions. I know that colleagues in transport will be having discussions with constituent councils about the major schemes, the major transport schemes that we want to support as part of that CRSTS, and that we'll bring a report back here to this committee on, is it the 4th of March, I think, Peter, at your next meeting, and that will then flow on from there to the board on the 10th of March for final approval in relation to utilisation of the CRSTS. So you'll have both, certainly by the end of this financial year, but you'll have the highways maintenance ones a little bit earlier than you will have the CRSTS, simply because we need to do some more work in relation to that.
Thank you, that's good to know, because obviously the biggest priority across the region is highways, and we need to be spending the money. I'll just bring Peter in then.
Thank you. Yeah, just adding to what Nick has been saying, we have been working at an officer level with each of the authorities over the last 6 months or so to develop that longer list, if you like, of capital schemes for consideration for spending from 25-26 onwards. It does look beyond that. It looks to 26-27 and even into the next period, which is the formal CRSTS period that government agreed. So we're now in the latter stages of that. This week even we're having meetings with officers from the authorities just to start framing that up, understanding now what it is that we're playing with in terms of the funding allocations, so that we'll be able to bring a comprehensive report to the 4th of March committee, as Nick said, onto the board on the 10th.
Helpful, thank you. Councillor Coppin.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for the comments regarding the highways maintenance funding. I know from previous discussions that I'm still not sure, certainly in Derbyshire, that we recognise that perceived increase, but await the final allocations to come through hopefully at the board meeting next week. But just to follow on from Councillor Clark's comments about the specific allocations, 2 questions. Firstly, obviously there's been an incentive element put in by government this year of 25%. So has EMCCA decided how you're going to sort of administer that, or is that going to be government set, or is it going to be EMCCA set? So obviously that 25% is being held back. And then in a linked sort of basis, I think last year you did it quarterly, so you gave us our highways maintenance payments quarterly. Is the intention to do that again? Because in a similar perspective, that causes an issue, because obviously we want to spend on the ground. We have to spend on the ground at certain times of year. So just in terms of how you're planning on phasing that money through again, or is the intention to passport it all through before April?
So I can certainly touch on the second of those.
Yeah.
On the first of the if you might want to touch on the incentive payments. In relation to the actual physical payments themselves, I mean, I'm very comfortable about, from a finance perspective, about when we actually do that, if it makes more sense,
Yeah.
potentially to actually have funding coming through at different times, because actually we will be in receipt of the money from government on a quarterly basis, and therefore we can manage it in terms of cash flow rapidly around those individuals. So again, I'm happy to talk to colleagues in across the constituent councils, probably particularly the Section 151 officers, the rest of finance, in relation to how we do that, and then come with something that hopefully meets requirements for everybody. On the incentive payments?
Just very briefly on the incentive payments, yes, the information we've had on the block funding, core highway maintenance funding, is that the government will withhold 25% pending our assurance, if you like, EMCCA's assurance that best practice, sustainable practices are being brought into play in delivery of highway maintenance schemes and activity. We've discussed that already with colleagues across the authorities. We're very confident that each authority is already following best practice, so we're confident that we'll get access to all the money. We haven't seen in black and white yet what the terms and conditions are of that funding. That will include precisely how the government are looking to us to demonstrate that, but we'll follow that up in due course when we've got that information back.
Thank you. Councillor Lux and then Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Yeah, transport represents 38% of emissions in Nottingham, which is our largest segment, so really welcome the investment in public transport. This might be a bit of a premature question because I appreciate it's early days, but just wondering to what extent we're considering behaviour change campaigning as part of our plans to accompany the sort of infrastructure upgrades. I think too often that gets left out, so it would just be good to hear, be reassured that is sort of being thought about now, and we'll run through the sort of discussions and negotiations.
Again, Peter, I guess, from an operational perspective.
Yeah, thanks for that. It is a really good point. It's critical that we follow up the capital investment with various behaviour change programmes, and that will be something that will follow on as part of the development of the policy framework, the local transport plan, and so on. It is largely revenue hungry, the behaviour change agenda, so we'd be looking to use some of our revenue resources to do that over the next few years. We haven't quite framed that up yet, but certainly we'd be looking to work with the authorities to build on existing good practice, and there is a lot of good practice across the region, to ensure that we're really maximising the investment, if you like, that we're putting into the bus services and the infrastructure that we're building. So hopefully it's a reassurance, but that will be captured within the local transport plan policy approach and that strong strand through.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon.
Sorry to come back again. Just in the mention of the formula by which the highways money is distributed to the constituent authorities. Clearly, the current government formula is based on length of road, but that doesn't help all of us around the table, and it almost demonstrates the variety of urban and rural settings that are included in EMCCA. Just because the government distributes it that way, does it mean that EMCCA has to? And could I ask that the formula is councils with big lengths of roads, but also urban areas where there's an intensity of use of the road, mainly by residents, but also people coming into the city, is also considered in terms of distributing that money fairly?
Absolutely. I think just to say, just in relation to the formula, you're absolutely right. I think if I'm correct on the formula, there's about 82% goes into length of road, and about 18% is covered by bridges and lighting columns, I think, as well. And the length of road is covered. Roughly a third on A roads, a third on B roads, and a third on unclassified roads in terms of the length itself. Been used by DFT for a number of years in terms of that type of methodology, but there's nothing that would stop us, as far as I'm aware, in the future reviewing and changing that methodology. The only thing I would suggest is that it's probably something that we would need to take a bit of time to think about to ensure that whatever we did had a fair and equitable approach moving in there. But certainly it's possible for us to think about changing that methodology away, because we've been allocated the funding, but haven't said that we then got to do it out on that basis. So again,
Just would like us to look at the options.
yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Flitter.
Yeah, thank you. I was just with Councillor Mellon here. I was just trying to champion the rural aspect of funding, and can we be assured? I mean, we all welcome the extra money that's coming in, and we've heard Mayor Clare talk about the rural areas, which we're grateful for. Well, we see bus services in our area, especially the Peaks and Dales, running empty, not running at the times when we need to be running them. So therefore there's no connectivity for young and old into the town centres. So we need that investment. And I'm thinking, with all this money coming in, will there be any extra monies for the rural areas, or are we going to see it all swallowed up in the city areas and the new projects? And the other thing I was thinking of on this subject, I mean, are we actually going to get our act together on highway maintenance and liaise with other authorities so we're doing the jobs at the same time? And I don't have to tell you that the problem is that we've put a beautiful new roadway in, and 10 minutes later the other services come in and dig it up. So a week later it's as bad as what it was. We need to get together a forward plan with all the services and the authorities and do the job at the same time and save costs.
I think it's an age-old, the last point you made was it's an age-old problem, and it's something that I know our highway authorities are very alive to and aware of, and there's a lot of strenuous effort to coordinate works on the highway. I can't say, sitting here at the moment, that is definitely as it should be, and I guess we can always continue to improve in the points you've made, and I suggest that it's not where it needs to be at the moment. One of the things that we are able to do, though, as EMCCA, is to ensure that we're always looking to develop best practice in delivery of schemes as the funding authority, in our role as funding authority. So it's certainly the conversations that we need to be having with our constituent councillors in terms of how we might get that best practice. And indeed, I mentioned earlier to Councillor Cupid's question, the terms and conditions that the government will put on some of that highway maintenance funding will require us to demonstrate that we are delivering good practice. So that, I'm sure, is wrapped up as part of that overall issue.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Just in terms of sort of looking at some of those sort of capital schemes, have we got agreed processes in place in terms of those schemes that may well be cross-border with other mayoral authorities, have we got agreed processes in place in terms of being able to sort of spec up and then allocate the funding to them? I'm thinking particularly I'm aware of we've still got a Caseborough station a new station within my patch, but it's very close to the Manchester border, so there may well be opportunities of being able to possibly get some funding from them, or it may well make more sense for them to do some of the work, as it's on one of the lines they've indicated they're liking to take over. And similar just with other schemes where we're bordering on other mayoral authority areas, just have we got those clear processes in place, or is that something that still needs to be new and developed?
From a financial perspective, we're developing them. So we're in active discussion all the time with the Director of Finance at Greater Manchester, South Yorkshire, down the West Midlands. So actually all those neighbouring ones we've got links in relation to that, looking at how we develop some of the financing process. And I'm sure that Peter, from a transport perspective, again, we're in regular discussions through there as well. But the process themselves, because we're still a relatively young organisation, are still developing through there.
Yes, just to build on that slightly, it is an expectation, perhaps not a requirement, but certainly an expectation from government that we, as a combined authority, work cross-boundary with particularly the other mayoral combined authorities. We had that conversation with senior DFT officials just before Christmas. I know the Mayor's meeting Minister Simon Lightwood tomorrow, and I'm sure that's something that will be on the agenda. We certainly do need to recognise where it would be beneficial to work together with neighbouring authorities to deliver, whether it means that another authority would come into our patch, if you like, and deliver, or whether we just agree the arrangements. I think it's a little bit horses for courses, but certainly the principle of working across with other mayoral combined authorities, and indeed with other neighbours that aren't, is something that the government expects from us.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points in answer to responding to Councillor Flitter. Yes, that is obviously an ongoing problem. It's a constant problem, and it's easy, obviously, for the public to say, good grief, why the heck didn't they all speak to each other, etc. And to be fair to EMCCA, that's probably more the Highway Authority at an operational level, making sure that happens rather than at the strategic level. But certainly in Nottinghamshire, we do strive very hard to ensure and liaise with the utility companies to make sure that we are aware of what they are scheduled to do, so that we can tie it in. The problem is, there's always emergency work, and you resurface a nice shiny road, and it's happened in my division where great resurfacing of a road, and then Severn Trent, sorry, we've got an emergency issue, we've got to come and dig it up. You can't legislate for that, so it's never going to be a perfect system. But that, of course, does prompt the issue about lane rental as well. And that's what we are very much striving towards in Nottinghamshire, because if we can increase and expand that lane rental system, that focuses the minds of the utilities as well, because they've got to get the job done. They can't just leave cones and barriers out or whatever ad infinitum. So I think lane rental is going to be very important, and we're certainly very much in favour of that. Just the second point, just responding to Councillor Mellon, there's always a counter-argument to a lot of these things, and I accept what he's saying in terms of, obviously, where you've got a constrained city area, he would argue in favour of it not being on length of the road, but I would argue that the counter to that is in rural areas, length of road becomes important because actually probably the rural roads are more exposed to the weather, and also they're less likely to have, or don't always have, curbs, etc. So there's the breakdown of edges of roads, etc. I think, to be fair, there's all sorts of arguments we could put both for and against.
You said it rains more in Nottinghamshire.
Quite right. Well, certainly
this morning in Nottingham.
we feel the ice more than the warm city. I think that's... Anyway, all I'm saying, Chairman, is that there are arguments for and against.
Thank you. Just on the lane rental idea, I think Nottinghamshire's the only council in East Midlands that's doing it. Will EMCCA adopt a policy that we can roll out across the whole region to help address what Councillor Flitter said? Is that something we're looking into?
It's certainly something. Yeah, it's certainly something we would be looking into. There's a number of different designations and tools, if you like, that highway authorities have got available to them at the moment that we can discuss in order to standardise, harmonise and create a level of consistency and provision across the wider EMCCA area. For example, we will be looking with the authorities at developing and defining a key route network, which will help us to understand a bit more about the most important routes and what sort of level of investment needs to be put into those.
Helpful, Councillor Coppett.
Yeah, thank you. Agree with Councillor Clark regarding the potential sort of rejigging of the formulas. I'm afraid I think that could be quite difficult for the rural shires. So to agree with the point made there. Just in terms of the discussion about roadworks and the utility works, I just wanted to flag alongside the lane rental argument. Derbyshire has responded to a national inquiry that's currently underway last week, where we highlighted some of these issues, because we can do warranties, and we do warranties in terms of protecting newly resurfaced road for about a year, but as Councillor Clark says, if there's an emergency we can't do anything. But the thing that we highlighted in Derbyshire was actually the reinstatement should be either full width, it shouldn't be the sort of trenches that drive us all insane. So I just wondered whether, as part of that, I think the inquiry deadline was last week for the consultation, but I'm sure that the Transport Committees would accept a late submission from EMCCA, so I just wondered, with that sort of combined regional power, whether EMCCA would be happy to submit a response as well to the Transport Committee.
It's a good idea.
We can certainly take that away and liaise with colleagues across
I'm sure
the highway authorities.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Good idea. Move on. Okay, thank you for that. Item 7 is the Transport Transition Plan. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Relatively short update report this time. We are trying to bring you an updated paper every committee meeting so that you're aware of what's going on in relation to the transition of functions and powers to EMCCA and resources. So this just provides you with the latest position. There is an appendix which is the roadmap. 3 main areas of transport transition. One is transport strategy and policy, which is in effect creating the Mayor's Transport Plan and consolidating the local transport plans that each of our 4 constituent authorities have had in place now for some time, more than 10 years I think in every case. So creating ultimately a single local transport plan, policy framework, policy document for the EMCCA region. That's something that we're still waiting government guidance on. It will come, we're told, sometime this year, but probably after the spending review and possibly after other issues that government need to resolve and take forward. But we have now a core resource in place doing that work and liaising across with the 4 authorities on transport strategy. And we will be looking to go out and do some stakeholder and then public engagement and consultation through this year with a view to getting a plan in place probably early 2026 and bringing that through this committee and through to the EMCCA board. So the resources are largely in place for that strategy work. It's a power that now sits fairly and squarely wholly with EMCCA rather than the constituent authorities. The other 2 areas, one is around public transport, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and the other is around delivery capability, and that's something that, again, we've been working with the authorities in co-creating a delivery model to manage the hopefully increasing amounts of funding that come our way from government, to enable and facilitate the authorities, the highway authorities, to deliver more schemes faster across the region. And that's something that is in a fairly advanced state of development now. Again, it's something that we'll bring back to this committee possibly next time or the one after that, so that we can work towards that for certainly the 26-27 financial year. This coming financial year, we're needing to build on what's existing, what's in place already in terms of the supply chain and the other mechanisms that the authority use to deliver schemes, particularly highway schemes on the ground. But in future we're looking to coordinate that more effectively across the wider region. Coming back to public transport, it's a hugely complex area of activity. As you know, we brought a report to this committee last time, and it covers supported bus services, concessionary travel reimbursement, ticketing, passenger transport information, and a number of other related activities to support public transport across the region. We're running at the moment in a concurrency period where those powers are available both to the constituent authorities and to EMCCA. The reality is that where the resources are is where those powers are exercised, and at the moment the resources all lie and remain with the constituent authorities. But the intention is to bring those resources, that's staff, contracts and budgets, into EMCCA so that we can create a more coordinated and consistent provision of public transport across the region. To that end, we're running a number of working groups, both thematic working groups and corporate working groups, corporate being things like legal, HR, finance, property and so on, and the thematic ones being around things like concessionary fares and ticketing and passenger transport, passenger information. All of those are working really well, and we're expecting to bring a comprehensive update paper and plan for that transfer of resource to the next meeting so that we can work forward through the April to October period at the moment. That's the target period we're looking at to consolidate that resource at EMCCA, and that will involve the transfer of staff, it will involve the transfer of contracts, novating contracts to EMCCA, and it will involve the transfer of budgets, as Nick's pointed out, through the levy, the public transport contribution, which is running as a slightly separate piece of work underneath that core transition work. Overarching all of this, and I want to introduce my colleague Catherine Stevens, who's EMCCA's interim deputy monitoring officer. She's been working with the monitoring officers at the four authorities, with the governance group there, to put together the legal framework and the legal agreement around how we might manage both the transition but also the ongoing arrangements for public transport activity and transition over the next few months. So, Catherine, are you happy just to say a few words about where we've got to with that?
Yes, so firstly to say there is an appendix which relates to what I'm going to talk about, which is restricted because it is a legal document, which is a draft document and contains some legal advice within the drafting. I understand from colleagues that perhaps not all of you have received that restricted item in an unrestricted form, but it wasn't, Chair, designed to be a discussion item today, and if any discussion of that document, for those who have seen it, is required, we would invite the Chair to move into a private session. So I'll just address the principles within that. So, as Peter outlined, to underpin the work that is ongoing in those various work streams, with technical officer groups, with those who are closest to the delivery of transport across the EMCCA region, we need to establish some principles by which all constituent authorities in EMCCA agree that we operate and transfer those powers, transfer the funding and the contracts and the individuals delivering those services where relevant. The document that's before you is not the fully fledged inter-authority agreement that the committee in November would have heard about, but it is a progress report for all intents and purposes to just to establish that a number of things have been established and agreed behind the scenes, and that work will continue, but it was decided that a heads of terms agreement was the most appropriate way to update this committee to confirm that there is work, considerable work ongoing to establish the principles, and the principles include around the levy, around liabilities, around all sorts of detailed legal financial work that needs to be undertaken. So in terms of transparency, the inter-authority agreement is designed to set out for all the authorities and the public the route by which all of us will come together to make those decisions in the best interest of the constituents of the region. The heads of terms is a principles document which sets out the parameters that all constituent members and EMCCA agree are the right principles to apply to the transfer of functions. The draft is a confidential one because it's an ongoing process with legal advice within it. It does have some specific items that are agreed as a principle between the monitoring officers of all groups, but those have not yet been through the appropriate routes within each of the authorities. And that's clearly a piece of work that needs to be done in addition. So it's not designed to be something which is up for discussion today, Chair, as I indicated, but something to note, to recognise that the governance group, together with the technical officers group that are supporting the work of the transition, can continue this work to a set of principled agreements which will form the basis of how we communicate and operate together to achieve the transfer of functions. I think that's probably all I can usefully say, Chair, but happy to answer anything if it's within the realms of the public domain.
Thank you. I'm conscious that not all members have seen that. As chair, I haven't seen that either. And I don't really want to move into private setting to talk about something that half the room hasn't seen. What assurance have we got that this committee will see the final draft before it's agreed, rather than officers doing it without any members seeing it? What assurance can we build in there?
So this committee was invited to delegate that authority to the members, but to the members of the governance group and the technical officers group, but it can be presented once completed to this committee.
I think it should, because we haven't seen it, so I think that's, if everyone's happy with that.
Yeah, Chair, just to clarify as well, am I right in thinking that the final version will go to the individual sort of cabinets at each constituent authority, so that's potentially another opportunity, but I think it would be useful for members of this board just to see the final version as well, even if it's not at a specific meeting for the time constraint.
Yes.
No, yeah, I agree. Any other comments on item 7? Yeah, Councillor Miller.
Thank you for the report. You know, in one sense, it would be good for this to have been achieved earlier and for it to be done more quickly, but I think what is more important is that we get it right, and I think, as you said, Peter, public transport is extremely complicated across our region, and what we don't want is for the new arrangements to come into place and things to not work for people, because the authority and the mayor will probably get the blame for that if buses don't arrive, etc. So I think doing it in a steady way is, as is suggested in the paper, is the right way to do it, so that when it transfers, it has every chance of working well, if not better. And the other thing I wanted to ask about is the levy. It seems from my reading of the papers that measures are being put in place to reduce that levy in the first year as much as possible through using BSIP and other things. Can you talk a little bit more about how that is going to happen, so that obviously all of us as local authorities are in the middle of setting budgets which are very difficult to set, and so extra costs, whilst accepting that this was an agreement as part of the EMCCA arrangements, if that can be minimised, that will be very welcome.
Thank you. Nick?
Do you want me to pick that conversation? Yeah, and I think it's important to say at this stage we've engaged all the Section 151 officers from the constituent council strongly in relation to this. I know certainly from the city as well, we'll be talking to Glenn Hanson as well, one of the assistant directors in terms of how this operates. I've got another meeting with him later on this week. What we've done is we've taken the gross funding, actually how much we spent on buses across all the areas last year, taken off that the bus service improvement programme funding that was utilised last year, so that's reduced the amount anyway. And then on top of that, we've then put some money aside for EMCCA resources, £5 million, that we're proposing to distribute then to the constituent councils to ensure a soft landing in relation. Now that's one-off funding, that's just for this forthcoming year, but hopefully that will help as well in terms of managing any unexpected issues within the constituent council budgets. And the proposal at the moment is that that's split effectively 3 ways, so of that 5 million, each of the 4 constituent councils gets 250,000. And then the 3 million is split in terms of the gross spend on passenger transport, public transport during 24-25, and a further £1 million is retained for emergency issues should anything untoward arise during the course of the first 6 months of next year before the transfer actually takes place. And that's been approved through the Finance Working Group, through Section 151, so comfortable with that. Obviously hasn't yet got committee or board approval through there, but everybody seems comfortable with that as an approach to try and make sure that as much as possible we've got a soft financial landing across all 4 constituent councils in relation to that.
Super, thank you. Any further comments on that? No? Okay, we'll move to the recommendations. Do we need to vote on these?
Yeah, as long as the
We've
committee's-
amended recommendation C, but
Yeah, as long as the committee's in broad agreement, as long as there's consensus, then that should be.
everyone happy with that, with the amended recommendation C, that it goes to constituency highways, cabinet members and this committee for final sign-off. Yeah. Super, thank you very much. Item 8, is that you again, Peter?
No, Chair, it's not. I've asked my colleague Tim Bellinger, who's authored the report, to come along and talk through it, if that's okay.
Thank you. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is really one of, it's common a phrase, a game of 2 halves. So it deals with the integrated national transport strategy and also with the devolution white paper 2024. So going first to the integrated national transport strategy. Well, what is a integrated national transport strategy? I think the answer is whatever you want it to be. The government in December went out to, it's not actually a strategy, it's actually a series of questions, and it put out a consultation in December which basically looks to 2 groups of people to answer them. First of all, there's one where you as an individual can respond to the consultation, and there's a set number of questions there. But then the secondly is one where there are up to organisations to respond to these, and that's as an organisation, that's where I'm responding to this. You might also like to have if you want to have a bit of a laugh, go and look up Yes Minister and the Integrated Transport Strategy episode about that. That gives some sort of context to that.
That's a documentary.
It's a documentary, yes. Quite. The reason is that actually, yeah, I said an integrated transport strategy is whatever you want it to be. At the moment, the government's questions are looking at it in terms of within transport. But actually, as we've discussed earlier in various things, transport is a derived demand. So it is about getting people to skills, education, it's about getting people to work and to health facilities. And it's also about getting a good integration with land use, for example. And that's where we've got things like our spatial development strategy under development, the stations growth strategy, and you'll have seen in the news recently that government is considering giving more derogation on planning permission for developments surrounding stations, which actually means that our stations growth strategy is probably actually in advance of national policy. So that's a good thing. The question, there are 5 questions there, and you can see those in the report. But what I think, in general terms, this question in the INTS actually is an opportunity for us to actually say, well, actually in EMCCA, this is what we and the constituent authorities have already been doing. We've got examples of good practice in all the different areas that they're talking about in terms of joining up networks. And we can also demonstrate that what we are planning to do here will actually enhance that feeling of what the government is trying to, what we think the government is trying to aim for in terms of a national strategy. So just looking at various individual bits. So, for example, data is a very important part of actually working out what we need to do with transport. And so, in terms of EMCCA, we will probably need to be looking at, for example, modelling of transport, and also working out how we model travel behaviour change, which is an important part of it, because obviously over the past 10 years we have seen significant changes in the way in which people travel and the times they travel and why they travel. So we need to be able to model that, because essentially we need to have that sort of data to work out what is an effective decision. Are our investments actually going to be worthwhile, etc. And similarly, from a data point of view, from an individual's concerned, actually the availability of information about travel choices actually is enabling our population to work out how they can get to those jobs and services. We've also got good examples of where technology and innovation locally within here, our region, can make a difference, certainly with all the different programs that we've got through the Transforming Cities Fund, etc. So we can give good examples of that. And then just talking about decision making, of course, most journeys are actually quite relatively short. So the average UK trip is 6.5 miles and 23 minutes in duration. So actually it makes sense to have decisions about transport actually being made more locally, because of course that, if we know what's happening in our local area, it's much better than somebody over in Whitehall deciding what should happen to our bus service. And then there's questions around responsibility and how we can make services more efficient, which are detailed in the report. Then going on to the white paper, again this is an interesting paper. Sets out a number of options for further devolution to the mayoral strategic authorities, and of course we are there's all sorts of different categories of mayoral strategic authorities, and I think we're in the emerging, sorry, brain's gone. Yeah, we are certainly on the road to it. They're talking about consolidating the funding pots, etc. We're also looking at basically the role of EMCCA in terms of a coordinating role. And certainly we're doing that through the key route network and the local transport plan. And the powers that are being suggested here will give the local transport plan a lot more force and authority. We will also be, for example, taking on responsibility for a single set of design guidance for highways, for example, to ensure consistency across the region. And we've talked already about lane rental schemes, and this Devolution Act will give more power to actually establish those and to have a mechanism to do those. Then comes the more quite an interesting one, because rail. We've got the establishment of Great British Railways, and I'd like to characterise the proposals for rail as a smorgasbord of different options being presented to mayoral authorities, ranging from, well, current arrangement of nice, quiet fireside chats and saying, well, we quite like this, etc., ranging right the way through to full devolution of services and the ability to effectively franchise or offer contracts for rail services and to take revenue risk. Now, that will be up to us to decide which of where in between those two extremes we might want to fit. But it also means that actually the mayoral authority will have much more clout with the railways in terms of the operation of its operations and how things are specified. And in particular, Great British Railways will be required to engage with us and will have to take account of our local transport plan in its plans. So if we say that we want a consistent level of service at every station of at least one train an hour, for example, or we want to make all stations in the region fully step-free, for example, then GBR will have to take account of that. Obviously, GBR will have a role in terms of defining what is going to be happening in terms of the national picture. So, in terms of linking services intercity-wise, so we wouldn't have any. We would have a voice, but we wouldn't have necessarily control over, for example, the intercity services between the region and London, or a cross-country service which runs between Wales and Scotland via Derby, for example. There are also various options to explore things around land value potential and also about stations as well. So that gives quite an interesting thing in terms of our economic development, because there will be stations with even small stations which will have buildings, etc., which could be then used, for example, to nurture small businesses by having sort of the authority taking it on and perhaps as having a peppercorn rent, etc. So a sort of business development side of things. Also mentioning about multimodal ticketing systems, again that's an ambition of the government to do that, and we certainly have got a good basis to go forward with that. Talking about buses, we'll be given further powers or MSAs will be given further powers in relation to franchising and enhanced partnerships or setting up publicly owned bus companies. Interestingly, they will be required as part of this bill to actually think about how we further decarbonise bus operations, reducing air pollution, and we've got to come up with a mechanism to do that. So that will actually be building on existing work that has already been going on in the area, introducing electric vehicles, etc. Active travel, again, will be working to support the constituent authorities to basically get in a good capability to bring in schemes that allow people to walk and cycle safely. And then an interesting one, taxis and private hire vehicles. The government is proposing here to actually bring taxi and private hire licensing from district council licensing or unitary council licensing in terms of Nottingham City or Derby City up to the Transport Authority level of licensing. The idea behind this is that actually that would allow a much more consistent area-wide licensing of vehicles and drivers. I know that probably members from the district councils will have a view on this, but anyway, so that broadly concludes where, just to say that also the LTP will now have a much more beefed up presence under this bill, under these proposals, and also it means that we will have a lot more emphasis on things like the spatial development strategies, etc. Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Tim, for that in-depth introduction. Councillor Clark, you indicated.
Thanks, Chairman. Three things I wanted to touch on. Firstly, in terms of bus operation and in relation to paragraph 3, top of page 23, about technology innovation. And I think from a Nottinghamshire County Council point of view, we're very proud of the legacy which we'll be passing on to the Mayor on demand responsive transport, because our DRT bus scheme, which has now been going for a couple of years, we've been expanding it, and that's because it's been working so well. The feedback has been fantastic, and it's the flexibility of the service that makes people really enjoy the service and benefit from it. And in terms of the environment and green investments, etc., you haven't necessarily got empty buses running around the countryside churning out emissions. The demand responsive is what it says on the tin. It's there working, carrying passengers rather than running around empty. And the feedback has been phenomenal. There's always an odd hiccup occasionally, but largely the response has been and the benefits have been great. And we sincerely hope that the Mayor will continue to expand on that, with the advantage of the region being able to expand further, and obviously it can cross more boundaries rather than having to stay within its own boundaries. So the public support for it is really phenomenal. The second thing was on rail, and down the paragraph 5, the bottom paragraph, the bottom page 23, talking about Midland Mainline Railway. I have a regular, in my cabinet portfolio role, I have a regular monthly meeting with Network Rail on the issues relating to getting facilities in place for electrification, principally the raising of the bridges, and that work is already underway. So I beseech the Mayor to use her good offices to bang on the table and fly the flag to ensure that electrification does actually happen, and that the Chancellor doesn't say, oh well, we'll scrap that one, we won't bother with it, because it's vitally needed for business, for economic growth in the region. So we hope that that will actually happen, because the preparatory work for it is already underway. So it will be a shame for that work to be lost. And just also on rail, more locally, just to give the Mayor a heads up, this is all about the Mayor, isn't it? I'll give you a heads up. I should be lobbying you on a more local matter, because local stations have been mentioned, and Bingham railway station has no disabled access. So that investment is required. It has no parking. So in order to promote rail transport from a growing market town, it needs that investment. So I will be lobbying the Mayor on that as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Mayor Clare, that was all about you. Do you want to
It was all about me. Do you want to take any other points and then I'll come in at the end?
Yeah, it's
a lot of interest here.
Melon and then Josh.
Thank you for the detailed report. I think if this authority is to maximise its benefit to the residents, we need to learn from each other and get the benefit from the benefits of the successes of different authorities. So really interested to hear about the lane rental scheme that the county is engaging in, and also what you just said about demand responsive transport, whether that work in the urban authority or not. It's a good example of things that are going well. I think we need to make sure that we get the most out of Derby having Great British Railways there, because that should benefit not just Derby but the whole region. In terms of Derbyshire, I think the stuff you do with the visitor economy is something that I think we can all learn from. And I think there are many things to criticise Nottingham for, but public transport isn't one of those. And I think we have got a good example, and it's recognised nationally. We had a House of Lords committee come and see our integrated transport system not very long ago. So actually the municipal ownership of the bus company, which is not just electric buses, as is mentioned in the report, but biofuel buses as well. The tram, the Robin Hood multi-operating ticketing scheme. I've caught 3 forms of transport this morning and only paid one price, and going back won't cost me anything. The workplace parking levy. The report feels a bit shy about trumpeting the successes we've got, and I think Nottingham has got a very good, not at all shy about saying where we not got it right, but public transport is one thing that we have. In terms of Councillor Clark's comment about the electrification of the East Midlands Railway, I absolutely agree, but it's happening at a snail's pace, and you know it's been.
It's not high speed, is it?
No, it isn't. No, it'd be quicker to walk, but it is something essential. You know, we get, as we've said, electric buses outside the station, but in the station there's engines puffing away diesel fumes into the environment, and it's slower than it would be if it's electrical, and you know I'd agree with your comments about that. On taxis, I think we need to be very cautious. We need to be careful what we wish for. Those district authorities around the table and other unitaries would say perhaps there's a disproportionate level of hassle around taxi licensing compared with the benefits. And also we've got a deregulated system where many of the taxis that you might catch in Nottingham are registered in Wolverhampton because people can do that. And it means that monitoring on a weekend evening where you've got our hackney cabs legitimately in ranks and all number of private hire vehicles on corners hoping to take fares in a way that isn't the legitimate way to do it. So being able to do that in a East Midlands Combined Authority, I think, might be a disproportionate hassle for the authority. So I know we've got potential of local government reorganisation, but I think we need to think very carefully before we say, oh yes, we'll have that as well.
Thank you for that. I don't know, Tim, if you want to comment on the licensing point.
Well, that is a very interesting point. Previously, I was the taxi and private hire licensing officer at Cambridge City Council, and my predecessor, unfortunately, when they decided to deregulate the number of cabs available, licensing available, I think he had to have an armed public protection because of the reaction from the taxi trade. So I think that actually Councillor Mellon's quite right to say be careful what you wish for in this. I think there is a strong case for actually better regulation of taxis because of course we need it for the protection of our passengers, particularly those of people who are sort of vulnerable people, children, vulnerable adults, older people who are actually having to use this type of service. But I think we do need to have a very careful think about where the proportionality of it and whether actually government should think about, for example, having consistent national standards across the country, which would mean that the example of people from Wolverhampton Council taking, because they've got the lowest entry requirements for the trade, actually bring that up to the better ones, such as Nottingham, and that would then, if you change the entry requirements nationally, it would mean that the incentive to go to the lowest common denominator would be therefore reduced. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Corbett and then Ainsworth.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, that's fine. Have we had any? First question is: have we had any discussions with the commuter rail network, the national commuter rail network? Most of our stations within the East Midlands area have got volunteers at every station that maintain those stations on the railway's behalf. The railway stations themselves are owned by different franchises, or government franchises, or by the government now. It's quite strange because East Midlands Rail go up the eastern side of the railway and the stations are maintained by Rail North. It becomes very, very complicated from that perspective. Don't forget the commuter rail partnerships at each station. Long Eaton's won awards, Beeston's won awards. On the Durham Valley, we've had awards recently, nationally, for what the actual volunteers have done. So that has got to be recognised and work with those people as we go along. With regards to the lowering or raising of bridges, that can't be done on the Derwent Valley line because of the historical reasons the bridges are protected. But I am aware that East Midlands Rail and Northern have ordered bimodal, so they don't need to have electrification. They can go onto battery or onto fuel for that short distance between the electrification between one place and another. So that's not actually required, and the batteries actually charge whilst travelling. So that there is a way around that without spending that money. And with regards to timetabling, I've been trying to do this for many years. The timetabling is all about the A to B from city to city, London north to south. They get the first process, they get all that, we have to fit around them. So trying to fit trains around buses doesn't work. You have to, in my opinion, fit buses around the train timetables. Now the only problem with that is they change every 6 months, or could. At the moment they've got a 6-month cycle, so that could change every 6 months, which then makes it difficult for the buses to actually do the same. So it's good, I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm saying it's going to be very difficult, but you have to bear in mind they won't change the 6 a day through Matlock that doesn't stop, through Belper. They won't change those times, they'll get that times because that's what they want, what the big people want. So it is difficult to actually do that, so it is something that you have to look at very carefully.
Okay. Chair, do you want me to respond now?
Yes, please.
So, thank you for raising the issue of community rail network and community rail partnerships. As a former station adopter elsewhere, and also a head of stakeholder previously at West Midlands Railway, where I was responsible for all the community rail partnerships on that route, I'm very aware of the importance of community rail partnerships, and I really want to encourage people to think about the station adoption. So certainly in terms of our rail strategy, community rail is right in there, and we have already been having discussions with the CRPs and others on that. So we really do recognise the importance of that those organisations bring to the rail network, and they will certainly be core to the way in which we will actually grow the network in future. Just going on to for example, on the you talked about the bridges. Again, there will be ways and means of looking around that, and also around timetabling again. But that relationship with GB Railways will actually be quite influential in thinking about those timetabling. Certainly on the route through Belper towards Chesterfield, there is of course the mining study going on at the moment, which is Midlands to York and north east, and so that might actually then produce an opportunity to look at the stopping patterns, or whether we have additional services could be inserted to actually provide something of that link. But it is something that we're certainly, when I've been to community rail events, I've been speaking to people from Belper who are very keen to have that link to Chesterfield and Sheffield. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on a couple of wider points in terms of the submission of the response. I guess my first one, probably beating Councillor Flitter to it, is I think there's not really any mention of the rural sort of challenges and network that we have, particularly in Derbyshire, but also I'm sure that applies equally to Nottinghamshire, but we'll let you add on that. Obviously that applies in terms of the public transport side, where we've touched on DRT, where that may be able to forge some of those links for us, but then also in terms of the highways maintenance side, in terms of the massive rural network that we have in Derbyshire in particular. So I wondered whether that could be weaved in, because that remains a challenge for obviously Derbyshire County. And then linked to that, obviously the white paper indicated around the establishment of key route networks, and I know I mentioned this to Mayor when we met, that I'm a little bit concerned about that again in relation to that rural network and particularly in relation to Derbyshire, because I think in contrast to the other three members of the constituent authority, Derbyshire has a very significant rural network in terms of the highway network, and so I think if we do go down that route of the allocating a key route network, we need to make sure it's not just A roads, etc. Because actually, certainly the whole of Derbyshire Dales, there's not particularly that many A roads that go through it, but if you therefore not allocate anything, and so the Derbyshire Dales and some of the other rural networks in Derbyshire risk sort of getting left behind. So I'm really keen, both in terms of rural public transport, but also in terms of the highway maintenance and the key route network, to make sure that we just highlight those rural challenges that we've got in Derbyshire, and we'll leave Nottinghamshire members to highlight your examples as well.
Certainly, Chair, but that is something that we will happily incorporate.
Super, thank you. Councillor Peacock, please.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. First I want to comment on Neil's comment about Bingham railway station and the lack of facilities there. And I think that we all understand that. For instance, there's a station in Ollerton which lacks a whole host of facilities, including platform building, trains, and that kind of leads me on to the point I'm going to make. So the extension of the Robert Hood line has been talked about and planned and discussed for an awful long time, and I think there's different schools of thought whether that's going to be effective use of public money or whatever. But that information's out there. That's been talked about. Other examples I can give you now are which are already in transport strategies and different things like that. The A614 improvements and the widening of the A46 around Newark. All those projects are restricting growth in those areas, and I'm sure people around the region probably know several other examples where projects are planned and thought of, and in the case of the A614 improvements, money was made available in 2018 for those, and they haven't happened. And certainly in the area where I live, around Ebbistone and Ollerton, that's seriously restricted growth both in housing and in employment opportunities. And again, alongside the Robert Hood line, I think that compounds that problem. So the point I'm going to make is that we're talking about submitting something to government about how we get joined up and stuff, and we talk about in this paper of almost waiting for the local transport plan to be ready. But actually, we've already got right across this region lots of projects that we need to be banging on the door of government and saying we need to get these over the line because they're restricted growth. And I'm not sure we need to wait for the local transport plan. I'm sure those projects, those examples I've used and others will be in the local transport plan. But I think we need to be specifically saying to government now, these are plans that are 15 years in the making already. These are plans where money's been assigned from government and different authorities, and they just haven't happened. We've got to find a way to unlock those projects because they are restricting growth.
Thank you, Councillor Peacock. Tim, I don't know if you can advise what EMCCA are doing to bang the drum to crack on with these things.
Well, I think that we have previously been certainly I once had a conversation with the Secretary of State, the previous one, and she asked me what my top priorities for the regions, and I said, well, the Midland Main Line electrification and A46 Newark North Bypass. And I think that in terms of the A614, 6097, I think we are still awaiting a decision from DFT on whether we can proceed with that. But certainly, it's not in our gift to the blocker is not with us.
But we need to find where the blocker is and unblock it.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Flitter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's interesting talking about railway stations, and as you can gather, times have changed and buildings have got older, state of disrepair. Some people have taken them over and just left them into rack and ruin. They're not fit for purpose. So we need to think about a way in which we can actually get those buildings back into ownership, that we can actually put monies into it and revitalise our stations. It's interesting to hear about being a station adopter. I was a friend of the railway station in Matlock for a while, and it was only for a while because the people on that group were told they couldn't work within a metre of the line. They couldn't work anything over 2 metres high, so you couldn't clean the railway station and where all the crime was. You couldn't do any real improvements. So it sort of fell through. But there are still people there that do planting and so forth, which is very commendable. But we really need to look at the station themselves and how we can bring them back into use. And I'm also interested in the green travel and the buses, because obviously, as just been said, we've got one way in and one way out of the Dales, you know, on the A6. But apart from that, we've got all the hills in the peaks and dales, and EV charging points are so far and few between. We would love to get a green transport system within the Dales, but we rely on local bus companies, not the national bus companies. They do have the facilities, but there are local bus companies that just cannot afford that investment. And we need to think about how we can incorporate our funding to be able to energise that feeling of getting new equipment, new buses, green travel into the hillsides. And don't forget, it takes a lot more energy to climb a hill than it does to go 20 miles further down the road. So let's be thinking about the smaller companies, how we can invest in those and how we can get our green travel.
Thank you, very good points. Tim, will that be good?
Okay, thank you. Well, I sympathise with you in relation to the 1 metre from the track and 2 metre height. I can understand why it's there because of obviously things like you know, the requirement for volunteers to operate, to work in a safe environment. So I can see why the railway does that, and the railway does it because it has a very strong culture of ensuring the safety of its workers, both the paid workers and also those who are volunteers. So I think in that case it's about doing changing the things that you are able to change. I mean, obviously the responsibility for cleaning stay cleaning above the height and towards the edge of the platform. That should be the responsibility of the either the train operator or network rail. In terms of EV charging, then yes, of course, you know, we're very keen to make sure that in the rural areas there is access to charging. And in terms of buses, again, technology is moving on quite rapidly, and there are examples, for example in Wales, where the route between Carmarthen and Aberystwyth has been made into an electric vehicle operation, again through some quite tough terrain, I suppose. So I think that actually there are opportunities to improve that, and certainly I think we would be looking to see how we could work with those SMEs to basically improve the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, that's reassuring.
Thanks, Chair. I think for me, there's probably just a couple of points. I think cross-regional travel is definitely one of those areas where we need to sort of investigate are there options and methods of improving it, both in terms of bus and rail options. There can be occasions when it can be quicker to get to some parts of the region for myself at one side of it by going into London and back out again than it can be just going straight across the region. And I think sort of some of the options that are available just need to be explored more to see what connections we can get better made. There's a bit for me around some of the some of the sort of the more specialised transport options that we've looked at supporting, particularly some of the tourist areas, there seems to be a little bit for me of, if we're paying public money into supporting those services, then those services should take all the relevant passes, etc. There's one of the services that runs in the summer through parts of the Peak District where, you know, there's quite a bit of public money going into that, but the operator not only doesn't accept the various national passes or local passes, it also charges a premium on top of that for that service, and that's something that shouldn't be happening if it's taking public money. And just, there's a bit for me around EV charging as well. I think there are parts of the region where I think it's not through a lack of willingness that we've not got EV charging. In some places there's just not the power there to be able to add in that additional infrastructure, and I suspect as well particular parts of the region, I think there's also that greater challenge in terms of we need to sort out some of those home options first, in terms of, you know, crossing grass verges, etc., for people that haven't got sort of, you know, direct access to a driveway or anything like that for their properties, and, you know, some of those more simpler solutions that may provide us with that greater opportunities for access. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. All great questions. Thank you very much. Again, EV charging is something that we're certainly working on, and the access to power is obviously a major issue. In terms of cross-regional working, yes, I can understand, and certainly it's something that we will need to be thinking about, is how we improve particularly the east-west connectivity. Certainly in terms of rail, we've been looking at all sorts of different options. Well, there's options, particularly with Midlands Connect, that are being looked at on the routes between Grantham and Nottingham, and also between Lincoln and Nottingham. And also we're thinking about, there's also some work being done on basically providing a very much improved service between Coventry, Leicester and Nottingham, which at the moment I think has a modal share for rail of about 3%. But if you look at the populations of those three places and the distance apart, under a sort of more normal circumstance, with a more joined up rail service, that corridor perhaps would see 25% of journeys being done by rail. And that would be quite a significant benefit to us in terms of reducing traffic on the major road networks, improved air quality, and also because it could serve the Freeport site at Radcliffe-on-Soar, actually improving access to that area as well.
Super, thank you. Councillor Mellon, you wanted to?
Yes, sorry, just briefly, I mean, just responding to Tim's comments about being asked what the priorities for EMCCA are, and responding the electrification of the Midlands Main Line and the new bypass widening. I just wondered if we'd all answer that question in the same way, and whether it might be good for this committee to have a bit of a discussion as to what our priorities would be if money became available. It's great that more money is coming in this direction, but I think if we are to work as a combined authority, all would need to be singing from the same hymn sheet, but it might well be after a discussion those two are the top two things, but we haven't discussed them as a committee, and I think it'd be good to do that.
I'm sorry, Chair, that I actually gave that example, because it was one of those moments where almost the elevator pitch, where the Secretary of State came up to you and asked you that question, and of course then you've got to make that split section decision to put those two forward. But yes, I agree that we know that is something that, you know, this committee is there to actually inform that discussion. Thank you.
Just on that point, I think the priorities can be picked up in the LTP. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an absolutely fair point. I think we do need, over the next couple of meetings, to have a further discussion about some of our priorities and some of the Mayor's priorities in the context of, you know, where the short-term funding might be applied, but also looking forward, expecting more funding coming through in the longer term, and how that might be framed up in terms of a prioritised programme for the region. And that will then help us to present back to government those schemes which, as Tim's alluded to, there's some schemes that are stuck with government, there's some schemes that are part of the large local majors programme, or indeed the Network Rail programme like Midlands Mainline electrification, which aren't within our gift entirely to move forward at this point. And then we can weigh in, if you like, with the Mayor's clout nowadays to be able to get these things moving off the DFT's books and onto ours, if you like, and working with the delivery authorities like Network Rail and so on. So I think there'll be an opportunity to do that. As I said earlier, we're looking further on in the year to engage more publicly around our transport priorities for the region, and absolutely that process will involve you around this table in the next and the future meeting.
Good, that's good to know. Just before I bring in Mary, can I ask a question, Nick, about the allocation of transport funding? So the white paper, in my understanding, is going to combine the pots of funding rather than having active travel highway maintenance. And I know at Nottinghamshire, probably the same at Derbyshire, it gets frustrating when you've got potholes to fill in and you don't have any cycle lanes to lay, so you can't spend active travel money on what you want to do. And the white paper is saying that we can combine that. Will EMCCA allocate it as a combined pot, or will they then create pots of, the Mayor may wish to focus on and then restrict to councils, or are you going to passport it as a combined pot?
I think it's fair to say that's looked for discussion in relation to how that operates in the future, but sort of my personal view on this one is that it makes more sense to have the flexibility to be able to actually link these things together rather than keep them in individual pots. But of course that's partly for discussion through this committee, with the board itself. I'm sure that the Mayor and others will have views as well.
Yeah. From a Nottinghamshire point of view, I think we'd welcome the flexibility. I don't know if Derbyshire want to comment on that.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that.
Just very quickly on that, I think certainly at the moment there is a reasonable amount of flexibility within the pots of funding that we've got, albeit they've been given to us as highway maintenance and integrated block and so on. We know, for example, that integrated block funding, integrated transport block funding, has been used by some of our constituent authorities to support highway maintenance work, and that is within the rules that currently exist, that DFT have set. But we do have, and as set out in the devolution white paper, we have, I think, an aspiration for an integrated settlement, which is a whole funding allowance, if you like, for the region, which would have even greater flexibility, not just within within transport parameters, but beyond that to the broader agenda for the combined authority. So, and that's something that is dependent a little bit on the status of the mayoral strategic authority, and one or two authorities are, such as West Midlands, I think, and Greater Manchester, are in that category and are negotiating integrated settlements at the moment with government. That is something that I think we potentially could move towards over time. Clearly we are a very, very young combined authority at the moment, but we want to move fast, and we want to pick up the greatest flexibilities financially as possible to give us the greatest impact.
Good, that's reassuring, thank you. Councillor Flitty.
Yeah, I'm just interested in that conversation, and I wonder what criteria, what level of discussion we'll be having on, I know what you term as major schemes, but I'm interested to see really the lower level schemes that are so important to an area. And in the Dales, I have to say, the Ashbourne bypass has been sat on the desk for the last 20 years. And we're taking so big a hit for the government's new housing programme that we're going to need that extra infrastructure. And I want to feel that schemes like that will be included in any discussions.
I think all I would say would be to just reiterate what I said earlier around the development of the big list, if you like, the long list, and working with constituent authorities to hone that and to fine-tune it to ensure that we're delivering schemes ultimately with the funding that we get that are, are the priorities for the region, which will be included in, our inclusive growth agenda, but also directly addressing some of the transport challenges that are there. So that process is underway, and certainly this committee will have the opportunity to understand where we've got to and input to that, hopefully in the next meeting, but maybe as we go into next financial year as well.
Super. Mayor Claire, I've got a list here
Thank
from
you.
comments. So, DLT rollout, rail electrification, best practice adoption across the region, and lobbying government to crack on with getting stuff done.
Okay, well, thank you, and a really good discussion, I think. I mean, I want to first of all reiterate my ambition for this region is to see a transport system, a public transport system that's affordable, that's integrated, that's accessible, and that unlocks so much of the opportunity across the region in terms of skills, access, jobs, homes, and entertainment and cultural life, as well as ensuring that we reach our environmental targets and responsibilities. So within that context of where that ambition goes, that's the direction that we need to head in, and I welcome the ambition set out in the white paper as giving further powers to combined authorities and to mayors on rail, on buses, and on achieving that integrated system. Remember, of course, as you well know, when we look at the other mayoral combined authorities, most of those were built on an existing passenger transport authority. We are starting from fresh. We're taking your 4 transport authorities, your 4 local transport plans, and bringing them into one in a way that, of course, we've never had that for the East Midlands. That's great because it allows us to reach and deliver on those ambitions. And I think, you know, party politics aside, I don't expect anybody around this room not to agree with that ambition of where we would want to be as a region. But it also means that we've got a huge amount of work to do. So there are things which already exist, which I think are really beneficial to our communities on transport. And DRT, as demonstrated by the NOTS on-demand bus, is a good example of that. I've always been really clear that I think it's a great example. I want to see more of it. I would actually like to see it extended in terms of the places that it goes to. And as you know, I think we've had a conversation about the, for example, recognising that if you take the on-demand bus out of Ollerton, it should not just take you to Newark Station or to Newark Bus Station, important for that onward journey, but it also needs to think about the accessibility into the hospital services and be able to get people to that if we want people not to have to do 2 buses from that community into Sherwood Forest Hospital at Kingsmill. So those are the kind of things that we also need to address. But I'll be very glad to see what we can do to expand and build on what you've done on DRT. And then that sort of links back again to, you know, the ambition is, if you look at the Robin Hood Pass, the fact that Nottingham has already developed that intermodal tap-on, tap-off opportunity, that needs to be available in the longer term for the rest of people across the East Midlands. Now, you know, let's be really clear. We know that that is ambitious, and we know that it will take us a little time to get there. But that's the sort of shining star we should be looking at, and thinking about how that helps to increase the number of people who go and use public transport, and how that meets the point that you made, Councillor Lux, as well, about the environmental aspect and the marketing push to get people on that. I have been on record. I've already backed the Midlands Connect and the Midlands Council's piece of work they did on lobbying for electrification of the Midland Main Line. I think it's really important that we do that. I will continue to make the case, along with lots of other projects around the region, to government. It's time that we had not just the money, the uplift that we've seen as a result of having a mayoral combined authority, but we actually need to see even more investment into this region to take account of the significant underinvestment in infrastructure and public transport that we have had over many, many years. And that kind of leaves me in terms of that investment around the stations. So there will be lots of places, not just Bingley, I'm sure, and I'm sure you will lobby me right now. Bingham, not Bingley, Bingham. Sorry, and in the longer term, there will be needs to be a discussion about how we work with the rail companies and those that already have responsibility for particular stations. Again, that's why I welcome what the government has said in the white paper in terms of that relationship with the combined authorities and the mayors over rail transport. But I also want to go further, and I would love to see the Robin Hood line. As somebody who, again, lives in a similar area, Councillor Peacock, to that connectivity. If we want to open up growth opportunities, it's not just in those communities, it's being accessible from those communities. And anybody, you know, who has young, who is aware of the challenges of young people in our communities, or those who cannot afford to drive, will know that the accessibility on buses is simply not enough to access the skills and jobs that we need, and we need to be thinking longer term about the opportunities on rail networks. But we know that it's more than just public transport. We know that there are other things that we can do. I hope in the not too distant future to have more news about how we push on the sustainable travel with the appointment of a lead for sustainable travel to help me to advise, but also to help to champion the opportunities that we have in the region for further development of sustainable and active travel. The power that's in you talked about in the taxis, I just want to say I'm not in a rush. And I absolutely pick up the point that was made that lifting it out of the districts and the cities into the combined authority won't solve the problem of Wolverhampton, and actually that will just still be an ongoing problem. And I know all of the mayors and combined authorities, while some of them would like to have responsibilities for the taxis, they are all concerned about the ongoing issue of local authorities who frankly seek to undermine the whole system. And I don't think that's a good place for taxis, for the public ultimately, or indeed the sustainability of those services, and that's something that we really do need to have a much broader conversation on. That sort of leads me into the point that's been made again about EV charging. You know, if we want people to think about different ways of travel, we need to make sure that when you are in Matlock, the only place that I've been able to find so far with an EV charger is down at the Premier Inn, and there's a long way from there to anywhere else with an EV charging point, a public EV charging point. And frankly, if we're encouraging sustainable travel, particularly into the Peak District and to other parts, not only do we need to think about the public transport offer, but we also need to think about the sustainability offer as well around EV charging. And then the just final thing that I'd say, so yes, I'll continue to argue the case on transport. I'll continue to argue the case on the integrated settlement. So Manchester and Greater Manchester and the West Midlands are trailblazer authorities, and therefore in April this year they will get access to that integrated settlement. At the moment the government has outlined that South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, Liverpool and the North East will have access into the integrated settlement in 2026. I am continuing to champion that despite the fact that we are a new authority, it is right for us to build our systems to cope and to utilise to the best advantage the integrated settlement now, rather than have to change the way in which we work later on. It's much more efficient, but also gives us access much quicker to those powers. And so I'm continuing to lobby on that case with government. And the final thing I'd say is the name of this committee, Transport and Digital Connectivity, is there for a reason, because we know that things work differently now in the last few years, that people are travelling, but they're often travelling in a different way to access. They're often working from home. They're accessing services differently. And as the government move, particularly in the public sector, to more things going online, we need to make sure that whoever you are and wherever you are, in rural communities especially, that you have access to digital connectivity. And so, just a reminder that at some point we need to ensure that transport, we've covered, and quite rightly is a major part of being able to move our region on, but we also need to ensure at some point we cover digital connectivity into this committee.
Thank you very much. Good discussion on those items. Can we take the recommendations A, B, C then as all acceptable with that? Thank you very much. That's the end. We did it under less than 2 hours, you see. Thank you, everybody.
Chair, could we just, the Mayor actually took my final point about the digital connectivity side, particularly again in rural areas. I wondered whether we could table that even as a short discussion or agenda item for the next meeting, as if March.
Yes.
Without putting too much pressure, because I know...
Can I just comment on that? Because on the forward plan there was supposed to be a report this time on digital connectivity. Unfortunately, we don't yet at EMCCA have resources dedicated to that particular topic. It's quite a specialist topic. But I am aware that there's an officer who works for Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire who we're working with now to develop a paper for this committee next time. So we'll have that on the agenda.
Super. Yeah, great. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor.
Just briefly, I think we've got dates for this meeting in February and March. It'd be really good to have a year ahead if we could.
Yeah, we're looking at a calendar of meetings now and hoping to get a draft for this 25-26 year, and actually one for the year after as well, so that then everyone knows where they stand.
And just to plea that we check in with district, boroughs, counties, cities, because at the overview meeting people were missing because it clashed with meetings in the city.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. Thank you.